Welcome again to a study of the prophet Isaiah and his great Messianic statements almost 700 years before the Christ ever came and the kingdom of God started on earth. We have noted that the modernists believe there was more than one writer named Isaiah. There is no physical evidence for such a position. In fact, all of the physical scrolls found have just one author and one scroll. Jesus opened the Isaiah scroll, Luke 4:16 beginning, and certainly it's the case that would have been an opportunity for him to say there was more than one author, but he only knew one. And so we have one Isaiah writing about a time in the history of Judah and Israel when the Assyrian invader was coming, and later in that period of history, after Isaiah's death, the Babylonian invader would take the southern kingdom, Judah. The main thrust of Isaiah's prophecy is toward Judah, and he has a lot to say about them. In fact, the chapter to which we have come today, chapter 5, is about God and Judah. And we're going to learn in detail why it was that God sent Judah into captivity later on in her history in 606 BC. And here Isaiah praises the God of heaven for what he did for Judah. And he does so in the form of a psalm or song. Isaiah writes, "I will sing to my well-beloved a song of my beloved touching his vineyard." In other words, Isaiah is going to sing to Yahweh, to God, about God's vineyard. That's Judah here. What did God do for his vineyard? And this idea of singing a song of praise to God was a long-time custom of the Jews. In fact, we have a record of 150 of those songs contained in our Bible that we call the Psalms. Here Isaiah writes, "My well-beloved hath a vineyard in a very fruitful hill." When God called the Israelites out of Egypt and protected them and brought them into the land that he had promised, God had the idea of a well-protected vineyard, a place that would produce fruit. And Isaiah sings that God fenced it. He protected it. He put a hedge around it. He was the caretaker of this vineyard and gathered out the stones thereof. He prepared it. He did everything God did necessary for the protection and future provisions of Judah. Not only did he fence it and gather out the stones, he put the choicest vine there. The allegory is that he put the Judah there in order to produce the best fruit toward God. And then built a tower in the midst of it. Not only did he fence it, he was the protection in the middle of it. And so there were guards around and guards in the middle, so to speak. God did everything necessary for Judah's great future. And also made a wine press therein. When he developed the country of Judah, he expected it to bear fruit. When you plant a vineyard and then also put in a wine press, you're expecting to get good grapes from that vineyard. And that's what God is saying here through Isaiah. Isaiah says, God, you did everything, and you expected us to bear fruit. And he looked. He's looking for this fruit, that it should bring forth grapes. What happened? It brought forth wolf grapes, wild grapes, useless fruit. Was that God's fault? God is being praised by Isaiah for what he did in bringing Judah into existence and protecting her and doing all of those great things for her. You could translate that phrase for wild grapes, rotten grapes. The Arabs call them wolf grapes. And now, O inhabitants of Jerusalem and in Judah. And so God offers a challenge. Judah, tell me, Whose fault is it that you brought forth rotten grapes? Judge, I pray you, between me and my vineyard. This is not the last time that God will challenge his people to a sort of courtroom scene. Micah, a contemporary with Isaiah, uses the same technique, Micah chapter 6, 1 through 8, and has God challenging Judah to tell what happened. Whose fault is it that you produced rotten grapes? That's an important point for us theologically, because it's the case that God is not at fault when we stray. God has done everything for us. He's given us life, breath, our very being. We are in his hands. He's provided everything we need for life and godliness. And yet, we don't produce the kind of fruit he wants us to produce. Whose fault is it? Judge between you and God. Whose fault is it that your life turned out the way it did? Whose fault is it that you are developing cancer from your bad habits? Whom should we blame? You know, the atheist blames God and says, if God's powerful, why doesn't he stop all of this? Simply because God gave us free will. We have choices we can make. And when we make the right ones, we have life, and we have that more abundantly. So make a choice between you and God. Who caused all your problems? Was it God, or did you have a hand in them? That's the challenge here. And then God asked the question, Judah, you make a choice now. Was it your fault or God's that you turned out the way you did, that you're now headed for captivity and there's no stopping it? What could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done in it? Isn't that an interesting question from God to Judah? What more could I have done for you? Could not God ask us the same question? What more could I have done for you, Keith? What more could I have done than I've already done? When I look at Calvary and I think of all that God did for me, should I complain? I have no room to complain. God could not have done any more. And so God asked the question, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, why did it bring forth those rotten grapes? And again, as we've already said, God is challenging them. Decide who caused all these problems. And now go to. God said, I'll tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do to it, because it did not produce the grapes that I intended for it to produce. I will take away the hedge thereof. I'm not going to protect her anymore. And again, we're being told, as we've already stated in earlier studies of chapters 1 through 4, that Judah was headed for captivity, and even if she were to repent, she still must go and pay for all of her sins. And again, there's a point here that when we're through with sin, sometimes it's not through with us. And it shall be eaten up and break down the wall thereof, and it shall be trodden down. God's going to take away his protection of Judah. And because they always produced rotten grapes, he says, I will lay it waste. It won't be pruned nor digged. No sense in fertilizing and digging around the grapevines anymore. No sense weeding it. She's going into captivity. God says, I will control providentially the clouds. It won't rain anymore when it needs to. In other words, I'm going to stop blessing Judah. That's it. She's gone too far. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel and the men of Judah. He tells us exactly what he was talking about here. And he tells us that Judah was his pleasant plant. And he looked for, now the King James says judgment. Underline that, it should be justice. He looked for justice, but behold, violent oppression. He looked for righteousness, but behold, a complaint. There was no mishpat, justice. There was just mispah, injustice. He looked for tzedakah, righteousness, but all he heard was ze'akah, complaint. There's a play on words in the Hebrew here, not seen in the English. Well, what was the problem for Judah? Now he will list here for us in verses 8 through 23 in detail the sins of Judah. And the number one that he lists is covetousness or greed. Woe unto them that join house to house, field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. They're living in this terrible, sinful situation, but their whole idea is, let's build another house. In other words, let's buy another car. Let's have 6 cars, 8 cars. Let's just keep getting more and more and more. And we'll be the best in all the world. Doesn't that sound a little bit like the American ideas here today? In mine ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair, and nobody will live in them. Go ahead and build. Go ahead and be greedy, covetous, because one day I'm going to take it all away. I'm sure that on one occasion, the fellow who used to live in my house said, this is my house. It isn't anymore. And when I die, it won't be mine either. God can take all of this away from us. In fact, he said it's going to get so bad in Judah that 10 acres will only yield about a bushel, and you plant a seed and it'll yield less than that. I'm taking away your reason for greed. You want all these things? I'm taking them away. The second sin he lists here is debauchery. They get up early in the morning to do what? To follow strong drink. They continue all night till wine inflame them. And they party all the time. And the harp and the viol, the tabret and the pipe and the wine are in their feasts. But they don't serve the Lord. They regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. They are full of debauchery. He goes on. He said, therefore, now notice this again, this same statement. My people are gone into captivity. When Isaiah sees the vision, they're already in captivity. It's going to happen because of their greed and their debauchery. Their honorable men are starving, as Isaiah sees it, in their captivity. They're thirsty in captivity. Therefore the pit hath enlarged herself. What Isaiah is seeing in his vision is the entire country of Judah engulfed in a pit. The pit has opened her mouth without measure. There's room enough for all of Judah in this pit. They're all going into captivity. Not one will be left behind. And all of their partying and all of their so-called joy will go down into that pit. And the mean man, the average man in the country, will be brought down. And the leaders in the country will be brought down into that pit. What a terrible scene this is of what God is going to do to Judah because of her sins. Those who are so proud about all of those houses they got, and all of those lands they got, and all of those vineyards they built, those also will be in the pit. They'll be humbled, verse 15. But the Lord of hosts will be praised in justice. Is this justice? Yes, because Judah brought on her what happened. And God, who is holy, shall be set apart, sanctified, in doing a right thing. It is necessary that this happen to Judah. And the lambs will feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. All that Judah had would be taken over by, early on, the Assyrians, later the Babylonians. Strangers would eat from those fields that the Judeans planted. The property of the rich is now pasture. Be not deceived, friends. Whatever we sow, Galatians 6:7, that's what we reap. So they are greedy. They are party animals. They are practicing debauchery all the time. Not only that, they are unbelievers. Look at verses 18 and 19. Woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin as it were with a cart rope. They were proud of their sins. He pictures them pulling them around in a cart, so many of them. And then they challenge God. Okay, God, hurry up and do what you said you were going to do. We don't believe it. We don't think you can. Go ahead and hasten your work that we may see it. Isn't that a blasphemous attitude? An unbelieving attitude toward God. And let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw near and come that we may know it. They stick their fist in the face of God and say, go ahead and try to put us in captivity. We don't believe it. They're so proud. They're so unbelieving. So covetous. So given to partying and debauchery. So that he says to them, you pervert the truth. Woe unto them that call evil good and good evil. What do we do in this country? Homosexuality is an alternate lifestyle. We call evil good. Why, there's good in everyone. Probably not, when your mind is on evil continuously. That's a perversion of truth, that there is no bad in anyone. When we call evil good, we have twisted what the truth is, just as the Judeans did. They put light for darkness. He just repeats this for us, so we get the point. Bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. This irreverence from their pride, this idea of shaking their fists in the face of God, has caused them to pervert the truth. And not only have they perverted the truth, they've decided that they know better than anyone. They're self-wise. Look at verse 21. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. Men today think they know all the answers. Why? We are in the 21st century. We are well developed in science and astronomy and chemistry and physics, and we know how this universe started. It just was a big bang. They're wise in their own eyes. They have decided they know better than God does, just like Judah. Judah thought she had all the answers. God said, payday someday. Justice is coming, and you are going into the pit because of your covetousness, because of your debauchery, because of your unbelief, because you perverted the truth, and because you think you know all the answers, because you think you are the deciders. It has been man's long problem of wanting to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Man has long wanted to be his own boss and to decide what's good and evil for himself. He doesn't want God telling him that. And this is not a new problem. This is the problem in the Garden of Eden. This is the problem in Judah. And notice one other thing he says. Not only are they all those other things, they are unjust. Verses 22 and 23. They get drunk all the time. They're mighty to drink wine. And they drink strong drink, which justify the wicked for a bribe. Unjust. And take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. There is no justice in Judah. Sometimes it's said in America, if you have enough money, you can get away with anything. That's not justice. And how often do those who can pay the best lawyer get away with things? Man's problem, well described here. Greed, debauchery, unbelief, truth perversion, self-wise, unjust. Is it any wonder that he looked that it would bear fruit, and he saw nothing but rotten grapes? That grieves the Father when his people do that. God put all of us here as saved people in order to save others. When he looks, what does he see? Others being saved by us, or no fruit at all? When we are God's children, sometimes He prunes us so we'll bear more fruit. Sometimes He makes it difficult so we learn, so we can bear more fruit. But when He's looking at the church, when He's looking at the saved, He expects more saved. Is there some reason He can't see that? What has happened to His church today? What has happened to His people today? Have they fallen into these sins as in that day? I hope not. And then he says what Amos said, that God's justice is coming the way fire devours stubble, where the way the flame consumes the chaff, and the root of Judah will be nothing but rotten. Nothing will grow there. Speaking theologically, of course. And their blossom shall go up as dust. Everything will blow away, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts and hated. Their sin is said to be hatred toward the Holy One of Israel. Again, Isaiah uses that phrase, the Holy One of Israel, which connects all of the 66 chapters together in that idea from one Isaiah, writing about the Holy One of Israel who has to deal with his disobedient children. But remember that all through this, God is working out His plan to bring the seed of Abraham, the Messiah, to the world so the world can be blessed. Despite all of the sins of Judah, God will still work out His plan to bring the Messiah. That's amazing, that God can use even sinful people for God's purposes. Therefore, because of all these sins, because they hate the law of the Lord, because they despise God, therefore is the anger of the Lord kindled against the people. And He has stretched forth His hands against them and has smitten them, and the hills did tremble, and their carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. This is Isaiah's vision, remember. It hasn't happened yet, but he sees it happening. And this must have been hard on this prophet, to have to watch his own people die and be torn up by these armies as they invaded the land. For all this, his anger is not turned away. That won't be the end of it concerning God's punishment of these people. All of this death and destruction by Assyria won't be the end of Jerusalem. She will again face the Babylonian army in her history. So his anger wasn't turned away by the invasion of Assyria. That wasn't enough punishment for the sins that these people committed. But his hand is stretched out still. He has more punishment in mind for these people. To whom much is given, much is required. Here are a people who were protected, loved, helped by God, and they shook their fist in His face. Is it any wonder what He had in store for them? Every nation that forgets God shall be turned into the pit. The psalmist told us. America, that ought to be our warning. And church, what about us? When He looks to see fruit, is He getting it? And He will lift up a flag to the nations from far. That's the Assyrian flag. And He will explain further about this when we get to what we call chapter 8. Isaiah will. And will hiss unto them. He will whistle, literally. Call the bees of Assyria. The stingers in that army will come to destroy. They will not take Jerusalem finally, but they will get right to her gates. Assyria will. And they are going to come quickly. The Assyrian army moved on horses and chariots and foot, and they came frequently. None shall be weary, nor stumble among them. None shall slumber, sleep, neither shall the girdle of their loins be loosed, nor the latch of their shoes be broken. This is a fit army, and she's on her way. Whose arrows are sharp, she's a well-armed army. She has a lot of chariots and horses with flint. These are war horses. And it's a noisy army. One of these ancient armies coming made a lot of noise, according to verse 27. And in that day, when they come, they shall roar against them like the roaring of the sea. And at one look unto the land, behold, darkness and sorrow. As Judah sees those armies coming, her nights will be filled with gloom. It's a bad day for Judah. And now we have the scene, really, of the entire message of Isaiah. We have the background of a sinful nation, chapters 1 and 5. We have the background of a plan for God to bring a kingdom out of all of this, eventually in history. And just before we get to the details of the Assyrian invasion, we are privileged to read of the commission of Isaiah as a prophet of God, and how it happened in the year that King Uzziah died. If you'll look at chapter 6 with me, verse 1. And here is one of the great and wonderful pictures of the throne of God. But we have to understand whom Isaiah sees sitting on that throne before we go any further. Here we have the Isaiah commission, chapter 6 of Isaiah. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw also Jehovah is the word there for Lord. But that's not the Father on that throne. According to John 1:18, no man has seen the Father at any time. According to 1 Timothy 5, beginning at verse 16, Christ dwells in the light unto which no man can approach. And so, whom did you see, Isaiah? You can't see the Father, or John's wrong. Well, the same apostle who wrote that no man has seen the Father at any time also wrote, when he saw his glory and spoke of him, John 12:41, whose glory? The second person of the Godhead. God's purpose was to bring Messiah through all of history for the benefit of all the nations of the world. And here Isaiah gets to see the one who came as Messiah, the very second person. This is deity, and he calls him Jehovah. You see, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. You have three beings who deserve the idea and concept of being called deity. It's what they are. They're all in that Godhead, according to Romans 1, verse 20. And so here's Isaiah seeing this picture, this vision of Jehovah, the second person, sitting on a throne. He tells us exactly when that was, about 740 BC. And this throne is high and lifted up, and his train, like the train on a robe or the train of a bride's garment, is flowing out behind the throne as Isaiah sees it. And above it, above the throne, stood the six seraphim, seraphs, six-winged angels. We're not told exactly why they do what they do, but we're told what they did. They took two of their wings and covered their feet. That may be an allusion to take thy shoes from off thy feet, Moses, for the ground on which you stand is holy ground. Maybe that's an indication of just how holy this scene is. But then they cover their eyes with two. And these seraphim are covering their eyes. Perhaps that's because of the fact that God is so holy. The second person on the throne is so holy, they just cannot look at it. Isaiah, when he sees it, will say he's undone. I don't really know why, but they're covering their faces, their feet, and they're flying with two. The word seraphim means burning ones. They are glowing as if on fire, and they are flapping. In in Revelation chapter 4, we're told about some kind of beings around the throne of God. Not described there, though, the way they are here. And then you remember in Genesis 3:29 that God placed cherubim, two-winged or four-winged, according to Ezekiel chapter 1, sometimes, around the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, so man could not, then the tree of life, so man could not take a bite out of it. And so there's various kind of angels. Six-winged, four-winged, two-winged, ministering servants, Hebrews 1:14. And so you have these various powers and principalities in the heavenly places. And here they're pictured in such a holy scene that they cover their feet and their faces and fly with two. And their job has to do with the trihagonon, the tri-holiness statement. They're crying, "Holy, holy, holy unto the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of His glory." This is such a glorious scene that they have to say holy 3 times, trying to help Isaiah see how glorious it really is. Holy, holy, holy. Kadosh, kadosh, kadosh. What are they describing? They're describing an inherent, essential nature that can only be described by the word separate, separate, separate. He is different, unique, and they can't even look at it. It's so holy. But they're crying out, this is what He is. And the whole earth is filled with His glory. Everywhere I look, I should see the evidence of God. You want to explain the platypus to me by evolution? God had a great day when He made that duck-billed, web-footed, flat-tailed mammal who swims. You want to explain the ostrich to me? God asked Job about, he said, why did I create the ostrich? He said, she lays her eggs and then forgets where she laid them. But she can outrun a horse, Job. And Job never got to answer. God said, I made her because I wanted to. There's no way to explain creation by evolution. It's impossible. It doesn't work. Too many ifs, whys, and wherefores. So everywhere I look, there's a fish down in South America who, when the fields flood, catches seed that drops from some of the trees, eats it. When the field dries up, when the flood dries up and the field is there, the fish's excrement plants some of that in the ground and more trees grow. Wonder how that worked before they got to that point in the evolutionary chain. Wouldn't work, would it? And here's Isaiah able to look at this scene, stand there with him for a moment, and catch a glimpse. Come on, catch a glimpse of the glory of Almighty God. Can you catch it? Well, if you do, the same thing that should happen to you and me is what happened to Isaiah. Watch what happened. One of these that cried, the seraphim, would cry to the other one. They were back and forth. And when they did, it shook the posts of the door of this temple scene. And the house is filled with all the smoke from the incense. Evidently, it's incense. And Isaiah looks, and he's looking through the smoke evidently at all this glory, and here's this voice, and it's shaking, and Isaiah says, "Woe is me. I'm undone." Why did he feel that way? I am a man of unclean lips, in the very midst of a people, Judah, of unclean lips. I suddenly realize why God is going to send us into captivity, and now I feel unclean. I don't have anything good about me at all now. I'm really undone. Why? My eyes have seen the King, King of Kings, Jehovah of everything, Jehovah of hosts. What a privilege. Nidmeyech, I'm undone. Nidmeyech, I'm unclean. I noticed the seraphim are praising Jehovah, second person, but Isaiah can't. An unclean person can't praise God. It's impossible. What should happen with a sinner is he should just say, "I'm unclean," because he can't praise God until he's clean. He can't come to the God of heaven and be unclean. He can't do God's work and be unclean. He can't serve the Lord of hosts and be unclean. Then, when God saw the state of Isaiah, when the second person saw what happened, evidently, he told one of the seraphs, "Cleanse him." So how did God do it? He had the seraph fly, take an ember off of, now we know there's a incense fire there, and he has a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from off the altar. This scene is one of worship. And he laid it upon my mouth and said, "Lo, this hath touched thy lips." Now, if that's a literal live coal, Isaiah would not have to be told it touched his lips. But because this is a vision, it's not a literal live coal, and the seraph says, "I touched you with it." That's the symbolism from heaven of cleansing you. "And thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin purged." I wonder why it touched his lips. Why not just touch him on the forehead or touch his shoulder? No, Isaiah's a prophet. He will use his lips to talk about a holy God. He'll have to be cleansed in the instrument that he uses as a prophet. The symbolism is so strong here that it's overwhelming. He cannot misinterpret this. Isaiah can't. "I touched your lips." And the reason I know he can't misinterpret it is what's said next. After he's cleansed, he hears the voice of the Lord saying, "Whom shall I send? And who will go for us?" Isaiah's lips said, "Here am I. Send me." I firmly believe that if each one of us would just catch a glimpse from reading the Scriptures, a glimpse of God's glory, we would not be stopped from telling others about it. And so one of the reasons we don't do what we're supposed to do as God's children, and that is tell everyone else about God. We haven't caught that glimpse yet. We must feel unclean yet. But we are purged by the blood of Christ. We were undone, but we're not undone now. And our hearts, our minds should be cleansed now. We should be able to reason with people about God. And God said, all right, Isaiah, your lips are cleansed, so go and tell this people. Hear ye. Listen up, people. Indeed, but understand not. Now, Isaiah, when you go out, you say, hear, they won't understand. But you go anyway. See, my task is to tell, not convert. The message converts. I just tell it. Isn't that great? We just have to tell it. Isaiah, you just go tell them, but they won't understand. So you tell them. I'm telling you, but I know you won't understand. Go ahead and tell them. And see ye indeed, but I know you won't get it. Gospel preachers have experienced this kind of thing over the years. You make the heart of this people fat. The message will make the people's hearts hard. And let me stop here and give us all a warning. Whenever we listen to the gospel of Jesus Christ, whenever we hear that He died, was buried, and rose again the third day, and whenever we hear that the way to obey that is through penitence, confession of Him as deity before witnesses, 1 Timothy 6:12, and whenever we hear we must be baptized into His death, His burial, and His resurrection, and we refuse, that very message hardens our hearts. And the next time we hear it and we refuse to obey it, it hardens it even further. Simply because the message of God has two edges to it. It's a two-edged sword. It can cut me to the heart, and my heart will get more calloused, more scars on it, more scar tissue, theologically speaking, spiritually speaking. Or it will prick me in the heart. My heart will get softer and I will obey it. So the warning is, it's very dangerous to sit week after week listening to the preacher offer the invitation, telling us what to do to be saved, and we refuse. What's happening is my heart is getting harder and harder and harder. It's getting fatter and fatter and fatter. It doesn't have any leanness to it. And when you preach, Isaiah, make their ears heavy, these people will get so fed up with Isaiah's preaching that they will accuse him of here a little, there a little, line upon line, on precept upon precept. Isaiah, we're tired of hearing you, you Bible thumper, you Bible quoter, you use too many verses, we don't get it. Well, that's all going to happen. But Isaiah, don't stop preaching. This message has a two-edged sword to it. And he's out there preaching to a people who cannot and will not hear. And because they won't hear, they cannot understand. Then said I, Lord, how long do I have to do this? And his answer was, until the captivity. Until Assyria comes, and as long as you live. How long do I have to preach this gospel, Lord? Till you die, Keith. Well, they won't listen. You keep preaching it. They don't seem to understand. You keep preaching it. They go to sleep. You keep preaching it. If you have caught a glimpse of my glory. And the Lord have removed men far away. That's how long you keep preaching, Isaiah. Until the exile. But yet in it shall be a tenth. Here's the promise. Here's the reason we keep preaching. Here's the reason Isaiah kept on. There was a remnant. There were a faithful few, and it was through the faithful few that God would bring Messiah. What a great promise. And here again, remnant theology. There were a few in Judah whose substance is in them, They're not shallow ground, stony ground, thorny ground. They have a substance. They have a heart. Those few, Isaiah, are the reason you're preaching. You're preaching to develop the salt of the earth. And so we have God in Judah. We have the commission of Isaiah. And we have what the crisis is and a promise. Chapter 7. The crisis and a promise. Uzziah has died. Ahaz has come to the throne. In the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah. This is the grandson now of Uzziah. This can be read again in 2 Kings 15 and 16. King of Judah, at Rezin, who is the king of Syria, and Pekah, the king of Israel, plotted against Ahaz. And they went to war against it. They did not win the battle completely. But Ahaz becomes fearful. And it was told the house of David. Now notice that Isaiah calls Ahaz's realm the house of David. That's important. Because Ahaz, being of the house of David, should have known that he was in the seed line of Christ and could not be destroyed. When he learned, however, that Israel and Syria were allied together, his heart was moved. He's afraid. And the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. A lot of fear in Judah now. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, go talk to Ahaz. But take your son with you. That's important. Shear-Jashuv. Take your son. Shear-Jashuv means the remnant shall return. Keep that in mind. Isaiah has a living visual aid, his own son, whom he named the remnant shall return. Take him with you and go talk to King Ahaz. And you talk to him at the conduit of the upper pool in the highway of the dyer's field, the fuller's field. You meet him there. That's an important place where the water was gathered for Judah. You say unto him, Ahaz, stop your complaining and your fear. Just be quiet. Don't be faint-hearted, for those two tails of these smoking firebrands, these burning embers. Don't you ever be afraid of Rezin and his fierce anger. And don't you ever fear the son of Remaliah, Pekah. You don't want to fear those two. Because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah, don't you be afraid that they got together. That doesn't mean a thing. And I know they plotted against you, verse 6. But don't be afraid of that, Ahaz. They got together and they took counsel. And they were going to replace you with the son of Tabiel. That won't happen, you see. So don't be afraid. It shall not stand. That counsel they took together is not going to happen. Neither shall it come to pass. For the head of Syria is Damascus, the head of the capital. And the capital of Damascus, the head of Damascus is Rezin. He reigns there. But in 65 years, they won't be a people. Assyria will take this city, in fact, in 722 BC. And the rest of that nation will be gone. 1 Kings 15, 2 Kings 17, and so on. And Judah, you'll last all that time, so stop worrying about it. Now, a strange thing. God offers Ahaz proof. A sign from him, from Jehovah, Lord of hosts, whose glory fills the whole earth. He offers Ahaz a sign. He said, you can ask whatever you want. Ask it in the sea or in the sky, or just ask whatever you want, verse 11. But Ahaz said, I will not test the Lord. Fear does some very strange things to people. He's offered a sign that what he's afraid of won't happen, and he said, I don't want it. And so Isaiah says, okay, house of David, listen up. Notice what he calls Ahaz. Okay, house of David, listen up. You don't want a sign? You already have one. Is it a small thing for you to weary men? Are you going to tire God out too? Well, he'll give you a sign. Now, in the King James it says, behold, a virgin. In the Hebrew it says, behold, the virgin. Not just a young woman. An Alma, a virgin, one who has not known a man. Behold, the virgin. Ahaz, you're in the house of David. Why are you worried about being destroyed? God has a plan through this house to bring his son to this earth. You can't be destroyed. And bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. It's interesting, the word Lord there is Adon. Adon. And the you is plural. This nation will have a virgin born to it. And this boy I brought with him has a message for you. This boy he brought with Isaiah has a message for them. This one that will be born to the virgin is going to eat royal food. Verse 15. Butter and honey shall he eat, that he may know to refuse the evil and choose the good. The child of the virgin is of royal descent. Second person of the Godhead came through her. And then Isaiah says, see this boy I brought with me? This Shear Jashub? For before the child, verse 3, shall know to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land you hate up there in Syria and Israel will be gone. If Isaiah was commissioned in 740 about, and Israel was taken and Syria in 722, it's only 18 years. And so why are you worried there, Ahaz? You're in the seed line of David. You're in the seed line of Christ. The word Alma, verse 14, is used 9 times in the Old Testament. 5 times it's plural, 4 times it's singular. In the Song of Solomon, it's used twice to refer to a woman who has never known a man and has no children, of course. It's used in Psalm 68:25 for the same reason, and Psalm 45:14 and Genesis 24:43, along with verse 16, where we know that the woman there has never known a man and will marry one of the sons of Jacob. It's used in Exodus 2:8 of the young maiden who was Moses' sister. It's used in Proverbs 30:59, again, of a woman who does not know a man. The virgin. This word is never used of married women. It is said by inspired Matthew that it is a virgin. He uses the word parthenos, the Greek word for virgin, when he talks about what Isaiah said about this woman that would give birth to a child. The virgin birth is the cardinal doctrine of Christianity. Some have tried to say that his resurrection was simply a statement about the resurrection of his cause, not his literal body. So they try to get around the idea of the resurrection. Some have tried to say he really didn't die on the cross, he just swooned. But when it comes to the virgin birth, they either have to accept it or deny it. But the Bible teaches it. And so you have a doctrine here that separates all of us from all those unbelievers. We must believe that he was born of a virgin. The conception was miraculous, and the birth was to a woman who had never known a man. She had other sons and daughters later, Matthew 1:25. But when she was betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found with child of the Holy Ghost, Matthew chapter 1. There is a word for married women, Besula, but not Alma. There is a word for a young girl at home, a Mesulach. It's not the word Isaiah. He used the word Alma. I know some have made excuses for modern translations at Isaiah 7:14, arguing for a young woman. But in reality, this is a virgin and one who has never known a man. Shear Jashub, the remnant shall return, as Ahaz. And that little boy I brought with me, before he's old enough to know the difference between good and evil, those kings you fear will be gone. It's an interesting context and tremendous spiritual application. God made a promise, and even when his people became wicked, he was still able to work out that promise to Abram that one day he would bring Messiah. And there are little pictures throughout Isaiah of this remnant theology, this idea that these faithful few will be able to carry out God's plan. And even when some of them are weak, like Ahaz was, God sends a preacher to tell him, look, you have nothing to fear. You're the house of David. And the psalmist said, these are the sure mercies of God, these promises to David. Psalm 89, starting at verse 3. And that one who will come to sit on the throne of Judah will find that throne in heaven, Psalm 89. And when he sits there, he will be the one that Isaiah saw, who came through a virgin, lived for 33 years on the earth, died on a cruel cross for you and me, and is set now at the right hand of God on the very throne that Ahaz occupied on earth, but now is occupied in heaven. What a great study. We'll pick this study up next time at Isaiah 6, verse 17, and we will begin to look at the Assyrian invader who will come all the way to the city of Jerusalem, but will not be allowed to take it. I appreciate your studying Isaiah with me. I hope this is helpful to all of you out there who are involved with me.
Never grow.